Siddique. Ilyas is a visiting scientist with the theme trees, but he has been talking to a lot of people beyond theme trees. So I would say he's a visiting scientist for CIFOR-ICRAF. He's been with us for now almost 3 months.
Yeah.
Yes. So Ilyas is an associate professor of agroecosystems at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil, also known as UFSC. He heads the Applied Ecology Laboratory there and teaches agroecology and agroforestry. He advises and supervises postgraduate students in plant genetic resources and agroecosystems, where the thematic focus is connecting successional agroforestry, functional trait diversity, plant and soil ecology, ecosystem multifunctionality, ecological restoration, and sociocultural and socioeconomics synergies in diversified farming systems. And you can see a model there of a diversified farming system. When you have time, go there and have a look what it is. So there's room for vegetables as well. All right. So I welcome you warmly for this CIFOR-ICRAF Action Seminar, Science in Action Seminar series. And his presentation, as you can see up there, decision tools to combine plant ecophysiology with practitioners' knowledge for multifunctional intercropping. All yours, Ilyas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Can you hear me? Is the microphone transmitting? Great. Thank you. Well, it's a very great pleasure and honor to be here to talk to you. I will share some of our plans and some of our ongoing work that comes out of this collaboration between the Federal University of Santa Catarina and CIFOR-ICRAF. Now, this is a collective effort, so there's a lot of people and institutions involved. Here, as co-authors, is the immediate team that's involved in this decision tool development. But these institutions, like from associations, the Brazilian Association for Agroecology and the Agroecological Agroforestry Network of Southern Brazil, are the main network association type entities that have contributed a lot through collective feedback to what kind of decision tools do we need to make production of diverse goods and services compatible with the restoration, regeneration of degraded ecosystems in the same place at the same time. So I will briefly start with the challenge. So we really need to produce a diversity of foods, medicines, fodder, timber, fuel, green manure in the same space at the same time. In each place we need these goods. And we also want to spend as little as possible inputs, external inputs especially, are to be avoided or to be reduced, while restoring soil health, biodiversity native to the ecoregion, especially the threatened species that we see less and less of, and to do that all in the same space, and without spending too much time researching all of this. So the big challenge really has been to make this diversity and the regeneration compatible with the time constraints and the responsibilities of planners, of farmers, and so on, to be able to spend the time in researching or acquiring the germplasm and so on to make this diversity compatible with regeneration. So that's why we have been asked to support this challenge, this planning challenge and the research challenge, with shortcuts, with decision tools that may help save time with that. So I'll start with some of the tools that CIFOR-ICRAF has already produced, the tree theme centrally. So we're looking here at a tool recently published, like a year ago or so, the Global Useful Native Trees tool, GLOBUNT, which basically unites different databases, crosses different databases of some 14,000 tree species from across the world, and lets us very practically select our country or region, sometimes sub-regional units if we're talking about big countries. And then from that, filter our climate within that country. So climates are characteristically heterogeneous within a country. So like Kenya is a relatively small country, but extremely diverse climates. So we really need to find the right tree for the right place. We really need to know the local climate. So this tool also lets us pick our local climate and then reduce the list of 14,000 species of trees to just the number that's actually adapted to our local conditions. And then we can select only the native ones if we choose so as planners. And so we can actually select both the local current climate, but also a projected climate in the future. That's particularly important when we're planting long-lived, slow-growing species that stay in the agroforestry system for a long time, are used for a long time. We really need it to survive in decades to come, in the climates of future decades. So this tool also allows us to include the filter of future climates. Now, this tool is crossed with another tool called Tree Goer, also produced by the same tree theme in CIFOR-ICRAF, that has a very detailed mapping of the climates across the world and lets us fine-tune which species are locally adapted within temperature and humidity and dry and wet season and so on, envelopes that let us figure out which species are really best adapted to our local project location. And then we can add another level of selection, that's the uses, so the socioeconomic demands of the local community. Does it need timber or fodder or food for human use, like for human consumption, or other uses that can be selected and prioritized to reduce that list of thousands to hundreds to even less species that are actually the most appropriate, both in an environmental and socioeconomic sense. So these tools are already available, made available by the tree theme. And it's extremely versatile and helps us select trees that are not in the most common lists of the prescribed kind of manual kind of prescriptive recommendations, but are the more threatened ones, the rare ones that we really need to get into cultivation and get into conservation through sustainable use. So the output is a table that lets us highlight here the list of species that are adapted to our local climate, and then several links that point us to other sources of information that include very detailed technical recommendations, like through the Agroforestry Species Switchboard, again, another tool made available through the tree theme. It links to several other databases, external and internal ICRAF databases, that give a lot of detail about how to cultivate, what are the value chains and so on of these many species. So these links are direct, so it saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of effort in researching using these interconnected tools, overcoming the fragmentation that we see. And it also links with the World Flora Online, which is a very powerful tool to disambiguate, to avoid confusions about which species we're talking about, especially important for those rare and threatened species that are less researched. And it also links with the Q database that has detailed e-herbarium and botanical details of those species. And it links to the Society of Ecological Restoration database on seed storage characteristics to help us know how to prepare, how to store, how to get into propagation, the species specifically. And very importantly, it also highlights which are the threatened species under the IUCN categorization of red listing. So it's a very handy highlight here, red, like the color of the background highlights whether the species is threatened and what degree of threat it's currently encountering. So it helps us to prioritize those species that we are about to lose, and we can still bring back into the ecosystems through conservation through sustainable use. Now, these tools, again, are already available. Now, what I will present now is our project, the collaboration, which builds on top of that as a second step, as a second level of decision tools. So first of all, we recognize that a lot of the locally used species, or the locally occurring species, like here we are actually showing the results, synthesis of the results from tropical dry forest in Western Mexico. But the example is really similar in various places, that we have a lot of uses here on the y-axis and a very rich diversity of tree species in small plots along the secondary succession in the forest, where we see the black bars are the actual potential uses of those species that have been reported in the ethnobotanical literature for those species that occur in those plots. And in green, we see the number of uses actually employed by the local people. So sometimes they are very underutilized because of migration, because of loss of biocultural memory associated with this biodiversity. So in many cases, we need to relearn how to use biodiversity. And now I'll come in with the tool that we're building here, which is after we know which trees are the right species for the right place, how can we combine them in compatible combinations in intercropping so that one doesn't compete with the other, but rather that they help each other, that they create conditions conducive for the development of the neighboring crop. So we are looking at increasing alpha diversity. Here we're not looking at the landscape level, but at the plot level, how to increase the functional, multifunctional diversification or at the plot level. So we do need to increase the range of species conserved in the agricultural landscapes because they're so dominant now in today's world. But we also really need to focus on increasing the rare and the threatened species in agriculture to conserve them through sustainable use. So here we see a collection of diverse products from these tree species and other biodiversity that is hosted here by the tree theme at ICRAF. And we really want to avoid repeating the same standardized kind of prescriptive lists of species. We really want to focus on those underutilized, the neglected, the orphan species that are forgotten, that have been little researched, but in many cases are actually threatened or very rare and have very great potential to contribute both in regulating ecosystem services, but also in provisioning, like to meet the basic needs of the population. So what we're looking at here in this increasing alpha diversity, increasing the plot level diversity, is to intercrop foods, medicines, fiber, timber, fuel, and so on, along a successional sequence that helps us increase the efficiency of resource use. So if we combine along a temporal sequence, different species that are adapted to different light environments, different biogeochemical conditions, we can increase the amount of production that we can fit in the same space. So here there are, I guess, 3 photographs of different moments along this chronosequence or along this temporal sequence of a successional agroforestry system. And here we really need to remember that we have a very pronounced shade gradient. So at the bottom, we have much more shady conditions, both from the very start in the annual dominated system. We already have shady conditions in the understory. And that just keeps continuing right throughout to the advanced stage of multi-strata agroforests, where the species are very different, the environmental conditions are very different from the start, but we keep having this shade gradient. And when we look at the early work of Robert Hart and Jack Ewell in the 70s in Costa Rica, we already see a detection of a drop in productivity and biomass after a few years of this agroforest succession documented here in Costa Rica. So first the beans, maize, cassava, and banana are intercropped, but then only after those short-lived annuals are removed, harvested, then the tree crops are implanted. So that creates a delay situation. Why not actually advance the intercropping with trees to the very first moment when the beans are planted and the lettuce and the horticultural crops are planted? That can save us a lot of time and also makes us utilize the inputs like irrigation, fertilizers, tending, and so on for the horticultural and grain crops at the start that can benefit the trees. But of course, that gives us a practical challenge to organize this diversity in space and time. And that's a big challenge where, again, intercropping tools can help us support those decisions. Now, if you look at natural succession, this model by Daniel Falster's group in Australia has shown that at the start of natural forest succession, we find that pioneers crowd out other functional groups during succession. So they really populate densely the community. And while other functional groups are present, they're very, very low abundance and slow growing. And then there's a sudden collapse. That's very common during tropical natural forest succession, a collapse when the pioneers die. So the biomass collapses. And that is quite a risky situation in terms of reverting back to a degraded state. So that's been actually highlighted for years now. And we really see a characteristic overcrowding of the upper canopy. Sorry, why is that coming back? Some delay. Just jumping some of the. Okay. So, which traits of plants are most useful to predict the compatibility between species? Now, again, we want to look at this along the temporal sequence of successional agroforestry systems, which I guess can be the most efficient use of space and time and resources. So first of all, we want to integrate more than one niche dimension in those traits, so that they explain more of the niche conditions in the intercropping system. If we only pick the traditional kind of specifically measured traits used in functional ecology, sometimes they look at a very specific process or a specific condition that is not, it doesn't predict such larger proportion of the niche space that we really need to better predict performance. And we should really pick traits that are already recognized, they're already used by experienced practitioners, so that they can actually make a difference in decision-making, in practical decision-making. And we really need the traits to be available, the data, the information, the knowledge to be available for hundreds or thousands of species, so that it becomes a universal tool and not, again, a kind of prescriptive few species type guidebook. And so the productive lifespan is a very powerful trait, potential trait to include here. So how long a crop stays in the agroforestry system, because that is closely related to the use of space. The longer a plant stays in the agroforestry system, the longer it will use resources, but also the longer it will take to take up space, to grow. And the shorter it is, like the shorter lived crops that are harvested and removed quickly, will not compete after they're harvested. So that brings an inherent compatibility that's very easy to grasp and unites several niche dimensions: water, nutrient use, light use. They're all integrated in this temporal life cycle trait. And then the maximum height, how tall a tree grows, is really critical to predict its niche occupation. But then another component, which is the relative light demand, sometimes is kind of mixed up with the maximum height at maturity, but is really different. There's short crops that are very light demanding, and there's some taller crops or trees that do tolerate some shade. So we really need to look at these two traits separately. So if we look at a mature forest, again, what we see a similar pattern that we've already looked at with the successional model from Daniel Falster, is like an overcrowding of the upper canopy and a very spacious, low density understory. So the light is monopolized by the upper strata in the forest. But that's not necessarily convenient for productivity from a productivity perspective. If we manage to create a light environment that actually lets the light penetrate throughout the strata in an agroforest, we can actually harness an optimum productivity of all levels. So if we aim for 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 like gradient of density, of occupancy of crops relative to their recommended density for a monoculture, then we can actually harness very much higher niche occupation than if we just let it grow as in a natural forest. So, but that would mean we need to do a lot of pruning and removal, slashing of selective cutting. So what we really see is that we have three principles that are key to making the agroforestry system efficient and compatible with high diversity. High density, high diversity, and intensive pruning. I'll skip over this. So what we're looking at is a key challenge is to understand the shade tolerance of plants. So we can measure this as the whole plant light compensation point, but that's a very complicated ecophysiological measure that's laborious to measure and is not very intuitive for practitioners or for others. So really we want to translate that into some more intuitive way of capturing it. And one way, of course, would be to just translate that into the categories of ground, low, medium, high, and emergent level strata, which would be just the inverse of shade tolerance and closely related to the relative light demand. So if we classify the spectrum of relative light demand into whichever number of categories, we can simplify the whole system. And here we are looking at initial data that is actually based on practitioners' experience, because a lot of the shade tolerance or light demand knowledge is not very much available in the scientific literature. So we really rely very much on practitioners to share their experience with others, with other interested people in agroforestry, to show how shade tolerant the different species are. So here we again see the strata, the relative light demand in categories, and here the time that a plant stays within the agroforestry system before it's removed. So here the lines represent the actual productive cycle, and then the circle represents the removal from the system. So here we clearly see an overcrowding. If we split that up into the categories, okay. If we split them up into the classes of shade tolerance and also classes of productive cycle, we can see those windows or those rectangles that represent niches. So we really want to pick only one species in each niche, so to ensure that they don't compete with one another. And here, in a simplified way, we're only doing that selection on two axes, that is the relative light demand and the productive cycle, which are maybe the most important predictors of compatibility. So we can start simply, and we can start with agroforestry systems that are already used by local farmers, or agricultural systems that are already used, like, for example, crops that they're already planting, like maize, avocado, or coffee, and that belong to different niches. So they are compatible with one another for planting intercropping in the same plot. But we can enrich this agroforestry system with more species without reducing the density of those by occupying the other niches, the additional niches that are currently still unoccupied. So it's a very flexible approach. It's very versatile. It's adaptable to starting from the local agricultural systems that are being used by farmers and start enriching them with additional crops. And then I'm just highlighting at least one species here within each niche. And we can see that some niches are over-rich with many species. So there's too many options here in the high strata, long life cycle, where we really have to pick which one we want. Whereas others, like the ground level, very shade tolerant, long-lived species, we basically have none or very little. So this will be linked so that users can actually pick their species, one species within each niche, and then click on it to link to the agroforestry species switchboard, the tool that's already available through the tree theme at CIFOR-ICRAF, and get more information about detailed seed sources, propagation, planting, management guidelines, and so on. And one very promising, important trait is the resprouting capacity that would be really ideal to put in, because if we cut back a plant, remove much of its canopy by pruning, and then it resprouts, the degree to which a plant is able to resprout after pruning varies a lot between species. And so if we can include that as a trait, that would be very powerful. So we're building this as a workflow with starting with the practical visualization that we have already shown you, but an interface for practitioners to contribute more of their knowledge so that they can use their knowledge actually displayed in this visualization and then use that for their own training purposes, like farmer-to-farmer training, or consultants can use that to draft their projects that they are presenting to interested people in agroforestry, and educators can use this tool for their teaching resources. And then we have a workflow to check that information and to make periodical updates so that the whole contributed knowledge can be then visualized and used by the actual practitioners and themselves and their support. So this work is actually integrated into the greater CAP-TD framework of the tree theme, which is a program within the tree theme to actually strengthen the whole work cycle from identifying priority areas for tree planting to tree species distributions, the planter's needs, and that's where the intercropping tool comes in. And then the germplasm challenges, and to overcome those germplasm challenges, and then go back to monitoring the progress and feedback. And that's again where the visualization comes in. So this is a two-way or multi-way communication tools that we're building so that there can be harness the most out of the collective learning. So I will just briefly highlight, show what's happening, some delay, highlight this little model that helps us a lot to study spacings and the dynamics over time, which is created by one of our alumnus, Jefferson Motta, who created this as a model and game tool. It's called Agroforestry, and I'm not sure why the images are not displaying, but you can check out this website, which is a very good introduction and display of this model. And I will skip over those this last bit, but just highlight that labor is really a key challenge in all this. Like, as you can imagine, that's why farmers have actually requested us across Brazil, especially in the south where we're working, to develop shortcuts in labor use, to try to mechanize for a small scale through machine sharing mechanisms, like the landless movement of Brazil, MST, has taught us a lot on how to share machines through cooperatives, associations, where smallholders can actually use a machine once a month or once a season and do the heavy, repetitive, straining workload and free up their fine-tuned labor for pruning, for harvesting, and so on, that has to be done manually. So thank you very much, and I'm really keen to interact with you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ilyas Siddique. That was, it is my dream that we don't just focus. We're an agroforestry institute, and what you talk about, what's possible in what you're doing in Brazil, and what's possible to upscale in agroforestry systems, it's music to my ears, because that's the reality of the farmers in Africa. So I'll open the floor for...
My name is Ralph Roethaert. I'm the country director for World Vegetable Center, based here at the CIFOR-ICRAF campus in Nairobi. Thanks very much, Professor Ilyas, for that wonderful presentation. I've obviously I had a keen interest in the position of vegetables in the system, and I was pleased to see some examples. One of the things that maybe as an additional piece of research or something that could be added to the model is pest and diseases management of vegetables. And it can work in positive ways and negative ways. I think, for instance, shading has a big impact on the occurrence of powdery mildew. A lot of Solanaceae and Cucurbitaceae, they're susceptible to powdery mildew, and that's enhanced by shade and less wind and less air circulation. So that's something to consider. But on the positive side, we're working a lot with biopesticides and natural enemies of pest infestations, and there could be a lot of hosts in this very diverse system that would help to address pest and disease management in vegetables.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. Well, I mean, the shade environment, of course, can in many species, not just vegetables, but even trees, and lack of air circulation can favor disease and pest incidents. So that's why we're actually drawing on agroforest practitioners' experiences, what shade environment is ideal for each species. So for the eggplant, how much shading does it tolerate without getting it, without having a greater incidence of pests and diseases? So this is not hard measured, but it's actually a cumulative and peer reviewed, well, not peer reviewed, but peer controlled, peer updated knowledge about which conditions are best for each species. So in a way, with that shade tolerance, we are trying to integrate these different niche dimensions, also the multi-trophic ones. So it's not just nutrients, light, and water, but also the multi-trophic interactions that are ideal under which shade environment or which light environment for each crop. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in that. So we do need a lot of refinement of that. But from only measuring ecophysiological responses to shade cloth, we'll miss a lot of that information, that knowledge. And I guess one thing that I wanted to highlight is we didn't include any of the multi-trophic interactions like pest diseases and natural enemies, natural friends, I guess. And also the allelopathy effects, like one plant producing secondary compounds that harms another. We don't, and also root system architecture. We're not planning to include those traits in the short term because we have data on that for very few species. So we really need for it to be a universal tool, it really needs to be traits that are integrating across niche dimensions. So like nutrients, water, light, and multi-trophic interactions in the same trait would be ideal, like the life cycle of a plant.
That's a very nice answer. So it actually links to another trait. So that's Lee's question there. Fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed. Sorry, I'm not in the room. I'm particularly interested in functional traits as a soil scientist, as naturally, Lee, wondering if you had included traits related to soil beyond whether or not the species is nitrogen fixing, but also on rooting architecture, pest repellent, etc.
Yeah, I guess I've briefly touched on this because of lack of, putative nitrogen fixing capacity is an easy trait that we can include, that we have data for most species. Just the capacity for it to form microbial associations to fix nitrogen is I guess something that we do have available for thousands of species. Yes or no, but that doesn't mean how well these symbioses actually formed in the field and so on. So this is a whole set of more complex. But again, as a basic trait, it's still very useful to include, yes. And it's easy to include. So we definitely want to include that in the interactive tool so that users can actually click, oh, I want nitrogen fixers in there. So which ones would be the nitrogen fixers within the climatic realm and within the compatibility?
So basically, it isn't right now part of your plan. So, and I feel that could be an opportunity for soils and trees to collaborate. Mm-hmm. And maybe when Lee's here, we can do that. I see.
I've almost got it typed, but I really like the simplicity of your focus on two traits. But you're probably aware that there's been a lot of work done on farmers' local knowledge of traits that affect intercropping, particularly for perennial crops like cocoa and coffee, so looking at companion trees for them. And those include things like canopy density, speed of decomposition of litter. And you're quite right that a lot of these, the traits that farmers know about and use are not in the databases of functional traits, like TRI and so on, that you can get hold of. So there's a real mismatch between, if we talk about farmers, I think you're calling them practitioners, but there's a sort of mismatch between ecologists, if you like, and farmers in terms of the way that they're describing traits that affect intercropping. Now, there are ways in which you can get hold of local knowledge of these traits, which of course makes it quite relevant to the specific area that things are being done, but is not easy to completely automate in the way that you're trying to do. And I wonder, how important is local relevance versus international sort of, being able to click on, from the web anywhere and get information. And could we perhaps combine those so that you sort of bring the international information, but make it relevant also to the local situation? Thanks.
Absolutely. Crucial point. And that's precisely the focus of this tool, to complement, to add on to the local initiatives. So it's not to replace, but rather to be a tool wherever needed, wherever requested, wherever desired, to complement the range of species knowledge and complementarity knowledge that people want to use. So, I mean, the local knowledge usually goes much deeper into the interactions and the observations of multi-trophic interactions and diseases and so on, and root systems, as you've mentioned. But so we really want to integrate a very fragmented landscape of tools into one globally useful tool to complement local knowledge and initiatives. So you are calling into question, or you are basically asking why do we focus on a global tool? Well, I would argue that globally we have a lot of tools that are fragmented and they don't really let us integrate that knowledge about intercropping and about technical details about how to manage, how to propagate, and so on. It's all very fragmented. So the tree theme ICRAF, the CIFOR-ICRAF tree theme, has already made like huge steps in integrating all this within the last year or two, like major leaps forward with those tools that I showed at the start. Now, it would be really powerful to add to that a second level of intercropping, I would argue, so that it can be universally applied and actually help us escape those standard sets of few species that are promoted everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilyas. I mean, we are the World Agroforestry Center. One would say we should have these agroforestry databases where we can point somewhere and say, oh, these are the 6-7 species that can grow on your half acre. I mean, really, that's what people come and ask us. What can grow under this tree? Or what can grow next to this plant? What can I grow with my yams and potatoes? And we don't have all that kind of information together. So if you can start working with us and others who are interested, agroecology team as well, the soils team, to start developing pilots for this, I think it would be really valuable, especially for Africa, where our land holdings are not like Brazil. We don't have that luxury. So I think you need to take that into account, that we're working with really small land holdings here. Questions here? I think I want to give someone a chance here, then I'll give. Anyone have a question from? Okay, so Joanna, just say where you're from, and because I don't recognize that name. So that'll be okay. Thank you. So go ahead, Joanna. You need to unmute. I hope we're not back into the same problem.
Your microphone is still muted?
You're still muted, Joanna?
Oh, the host needs to permit?
Do you want to quickly type your question? Because we have a problem here. Okay, yeah. So can we go to the chat, please? All right. Okay, just go up, please.
Okay, hello.
There's a question from Sami.
Can you hear me?
Okay, Giovanna, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you for the very nice presentation, Ilyas. I'm Giovanna I was working with Peru in Latin America, and we developed a tool. I think
I'm sorry, you're not clear at all. We can hear you, but we don't hear the words. It's all. Do you want to try? Yeah, I don't know.
Hello?
Maybe let's try again.
Hello, is that
hi?
better?
Yes, we can hear you, but we
Okay.
can't hear the words clearly for some reason. Can you speak louder and maybe a bit slower and just bite your words?
Yeah, maybe my micro is not good. Yeah, I was working in Peru. We developed a decision tool as well called ArbolSAF, and I want to tell a bit of this tool and also the database platform, because I think there is a lot of synergy with the job that with the work that is doing the Professor Ilyas. We have now, for example, 82 species. We were looking for 163 variables for each species, and those variables cover all the physiological uses, climate parameters, everything that can be useful to know how a tree can be developed in certain region. And this we did reviewing more than 250 literature. So we have now this platform that we can trace each data that we found. We can know which species has more data or less data. It was very interesting looking for this data, because sometimes we think that like roots can be easy to find, but we realize that there is not, or in the literature we don't find this data. So it's a gold mine, I will think, and will be nice to talk with Professor Ilyas to see how database can be used for his project. We develop online tools also called ArbolSAF. We just use 50% or less the data that we have. So still we have a lot of information that we can use. And also the most important, I think, we took like 2 years developing a protocol to collect information in the way that each data can be traceable and no book has published this data. So it is also a CIFOR-ICRAF tool that we have now.
Okay, Giovanna, I think he's got the gist of your question. So I'll pass it to Ilyas. Maybe you're from the same continent, so you understand each other. Really, I had a problem understanding that. Go on.
I might have seen actually your tool, Giovanna, of some 80 species or so in Peru. But just to make sure, I would really appreciate if you could get in touch by email, because our proposal really is to connect the fragmented landscape of tools. So it's by no means to replace anything, because your local tool is much more powerful for the local conditions than we can ever achieve with a global tool. That's the case for your Peruvian tool and the case for so many other tools that are already available or being made available as we speak. Another one in Indonesia that I've talked to people here at ICRAF just a couple of months ago at GLF here, very powerful tool that they're developing there also for intercropping. So our idea is to complement and to integrate those tools that are fragmented and point to them. So we can incorporate links to your local tools so that people can easily find your tool from this global starting point.
Okay, thank you. There are 2 questions online, which I'm going to request. If you go up, I saw a question from Sammy Carson. Oh, here we are. Thanks, Ilyas. Great presentation. It sounded the DST is knowledge dense. Who would you see the most relevant audience, and what platforms do you see this working best to connect as citizen science-based tool?
Great. Yeah, in the short term, I would see educators, agroforest educators who give courses, or like both directly to practitioners, but also to a more formal educational setting, and consultants who draft projects and implement projects for agroforestry, and policymakers. These would be the main initial target audience. But in the longer term, as our tool becomes more palatable, more refined in terms of interactive and intuitive kind of icon representation, for example, of the different elements, and we don't need so much the definitions and the quantifications, but more the intuitive kind of communication of those traits, then we aim to get to actual agroforest practitioners directly, like farmers and others.
So there's last question here. If there are any databases in the works that incorporate farmer knowledge about traits for intercropping under different environmental conditions, I would love to be part of such an initiative. Okay, so Anne, get in touch with Ilyas. His email is on his presentation, and we would love that. Hi, Anne. And there's Anne Correa, who is asking a question. We also have the interactive suitable tree species selection and management tool for East Africa. Yes, thank you. And I think Ilyas has seen that. And yes, it's useful. And link up, please.
Roland pointed out something.
Oh, Roland, did you? I thought you were in Brazil, Roland. Oh, you're here. Yeah. You're back.
Roland actually asked me to mention Light Farm, which is an open source app to help farmers and their technical supporters to transition to a more agroecological farm management. So this is a powerful tool because it ensures data sovereignty and the open source software, and it helps farmers to manage their resources, their time, their staff, or their co-workers. So if anyone is interested, we are also collaborators in the development of this. Lightfarm, L-I-T-E farm.org.
And he said, if time permits, also about the potential natural vegetation and mimicry of those in managed systems. And I was kind of surprised we hadn't heard of Mina's work and Ong's article. So Mina, you've been mentioned, even though you didn't ask a question. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ilyas, for a very nice presentation. You can see there's a lot of interest among the different groups. So reach out, those of you who are interested, reach out to Ilyas, and